When I was in Africa, I saw that there was tremendous corruption and foreign aid workers were looking the other way and their projects were at a standstill because the funds were stolen by their local counterparts, but they couldn't touch that. The more I delved into psychology, the more I had already gotten past this saving the world mindset. So much of academic psychology is about saving other people, as if you could reach into someone else's brain and fix them, and somehow that the only way to be happy is by fixing someone else, and it's somehow like taboo to feel happy until you fix others.
Hi, Loretta. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. Now, as an American author, educator, and founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, what does performance mean to you?
I look at it from the perspective of happy brain chemicals. So first, I know that they're not meant to be on all the time, and they surge in appropriate moments, and they couldn't do their job if they were surging all the time. So we're not meant to have a peak experience all the time. Somehow, if you chase it all the time, you can even make bad choices that reduce your happy chemicals in the long run. So I'm really focused on understanding what triggers the happy chemicals so we can get them as much as possible in the long run without obsessing over magnifying them in every moment.
What does happy chemicals even mean?
So I focus on dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. We all have jillions of chemicals that regulate our bodies, and they're all inherited from earlier mammals, and they all have specific jobs. But these particular chemicals, their only job is to turn on a good feeling. But the good feeling is not for you to just sit around and enjoy life. But in the animal world, a good feeling motivates a step forward action toward an opportunity to meet a survival need. And there are 4 different happy chemicals because there are different survival needs that we need to act on all of them.
Can you briefly describe what each of these chemicals do?
Sure. So dopamine is the most general one. People have heard a lot of dopamine in recent years, but we mostly are now hearing about people who are overdoing it. And that's maybe vilifying dopamine as a bad thing. And that doesn't really help us understand it. So the bottom line is that dopamine is the good feeling of opportunity. You are predicting that a certain action can help you meet a need, and it has to be an unmet need. So this makes life complicated because as soon as a need is met, it stops sparking your dopamine. And if you define your goals too high and you're not getting closer to them, dopamine is not released. So that's the complication of dopamine. Oxytocin is the natural urge to have the protection of a group. And we often hear about animals in a herd, but once again, this is often explained in an oversimplified way where we think animals just get along with each other and have togetherness all the time. But the fact is that herds are bad in some moments and good in other moments. So oxytocin is your reward for basically tolerating the herd when you need it. And serotonin is the reward for that mammalian impulse to have a moment of strength, a moment of social dominance. Even though we're taught that this is not nice and we won't admit to thinking that with our verbal brain, in the animal world, it's easy to see that everyone looks for a moment of strength because that promotes survival. That's a very short answer, as short as I can make it.
You mentioned at the beginning that these days we're getting a lot of dopamine hit and doing good by us. What does that mean, and how have we manufactured a life where we're getting so much dopamine?
No, I wasn't really saying that we are getting too much dopamine. It's not a matter of too much or too little because a monkey needs dopamine all day, every day. It's what motivates them. Okay, now I'll go for food. Now I'll go for water. Now I'll fight back against that guy who took my banana, whatever. Now I'll go for a reproductive opportunity. But when you go for dopamine in bad ways, in ways that hurt you in the long run, just to get the joy of that excitement, which is tempting because in the modern world where your physical needs are already met and your social needs, you don't have a lot of control over other people. And so all these other ways of sparking dopamine are tempting.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So for it's very individual in the sense that one person may love junk food, another person may hate junk food, but love, let's say, alcohol or gambling or spending or maybe even getting into fights with people. So each brain is wired by whatever sparked their dopamine in their past. And even people who like junk food, one person loves one kind and hates another. So it's very individual, and that's why it's so important to understand one's own joy of dopamine and how it got wired in your past.
Is it just based on prior experiences that we have gone through that kind of dictates what we seek? Or is there another genetic component to it?
There's a lot of discussion about genetic component these days, but in my opinion, it makes people comfortable because they want to hear it's not my fault, it's my genes, and the doctor can fix it. And it's uncomfortable to think that your past experience wired you. And many people think it's like insulting to think that they're acting on childhood influences. So I always focus on the fact that it's not only normal, but it's inevitable. We are all wired by our early experience. And like I had yoga teachers who told me, oh, you should not run on autopilot, but we all run on autopilot. That's how our brain is meant to work. So, whatever genetic component there might be, that research is well funded these days, whereas no one is funding research on correlating early experience with later impulses because it's very hard to do those studies.
What inspired your fascination with studying our brain's happy chemicals?
Sure. So it's a whole bunch of things. And the first one I have to say is that I grew up around a lot of unhappiness. And I was always wondering, what is my mother so upset about? Because it was not that visible. And truth be told, she blamed me sometimes. So I was extra motivated to figure it out because I thought, I don't think I'm really causing all this unhappiness. Then I got interested in academic psychology in my earlier years, and I thought that had the answer to everything. And then it was when I got disappointed and lived by the book of academic psychology and still did not have happiness every moment, nor did my children or my students. And that's what motivated me to keep digging and to keep looking at research. And when I kept hearing about the animal origins of this and that, but no one connected the dots, I focused completely on animal research. And then suddenly everything made sense to me. And I wanted to just connect the dots.
So, what is it that happens in our early childhood that shapes how our brain releases these chemicals?
Great question. So, first, we are all born with billions of neurons, but almost no connections between them. So, you may have heard that animals can run with the herd the day after they're born, but humans take like decades to meet their own survival needs. So, that's because we have more neurons, but fewer connections between the neurons. And most of us, like when we're in our 20s, we think we invented everything. But in fact, we spent 20 whole years connecting up those neurons. And in the state of nature, there was no birth control. So you were quickly busy taking care of your own children, and you needed to be wired up with survival skills by the time you reached puberty rather than saying I'm just going to reinvent the world after I leave home. No, I forgot what the question was.
What is it that's happening in these early
Oh,
childhood years?
yes. So that was a long way of saying what's happening is two things. There's a chemical called myelin, which people colloquially know it as white matter as opposed to gray matter. That means the super big pathways in your brain. You have a lot of myelin before age 8 and during puberty. And later on, we use those super big pathways because they're so efficient. We use them without conscious awareness because the electricity in your brain flows like water in a storm, finding the paths of least resistance. And that's why there's nothing shameful about using these old neural pathways. It's how we're designed to work, and it works without conscious thought. So you don't remember that early experience when you use that old neural pathway.
So these neural pathways are getting set up when you're a kid. You live with it until in your 20s, your 30s, when you have started to realize that, oh my God, I've developed some bad habits, bad behaviors. How do you go about even rewiring these chemical patterns in adulthood?
Good question. And we can even, it's like no longer PC to say something is bad, but we can say that it's non peak, right? So, to use that as an example, is that so many people are selling this peak everything, but you can't keep it up. And that's the idea that you can't keep up peak all the time. And whether it's a physical performance, a work performance, or a social relationship performance. Oh, no, I forgot the question again. Tell me again.
Now, the question is that how do you even go about
Oh,
rewiring
changing
these
it.
chemical
Yes.
patterns? Yes.
Yes. That's not easy because we're meant to be wired when we're young and we don't have a lot of myelin later on. The myelin we have is just barely enough to repair the holes in the myelin you have. And
Mhm.
see, now at my age, I have the holes. I didn't repair all the holes, and it leaks out like a leaky pipe, literally. So, it being the electricity in your brain. So, how you would build new pathways, let's say in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it's exactly like learning a foreign language in those years, which is something that's not fun and people don't like to do it, yet everyone knows it's possible. And the simple answer is repetition. But what you want to repeat is the desired behavior rather than the undesired behavior. So the simplest example is a person who comes home from work and says, oh, I had a bad day, so I'm going to open a bottle of wine or go online or whatever that things they do. And you reward yourself for the undesired behavior. And instead you say, okay, I'm going to allow myself some rewards, but only when I do the thing I want to do, which is, let's say, for example, have a positive attitude. Now, there's one more thing missing, that one component. Why does a person love whatever is their bad habit? It's not just because it's the cookie or the thing you bought on Amazon, because everyone knows once you get the cookie, it's not like you say, why am I ruining my life over this cookie? So the neural pathway that creates that behavior is the shift from a bad feeling to a good feeling the moment when you first had that cookie. So let's use the example of, let's say, a young person that takes some pill in a moment when they were having a bad life experience. Or they, let's say, engage in a dangerous behavior in a moment when they were having a bad life experience. Now your brain is so focused on this pill or this dangerous choice that you completely forget about the bad thing going on in your life. So let's say you failed a test, and now you are engaging in, young people, let's say, do shoplifting. Okay? And that person, maybe with plenty of money, is doing shoplifting because shoplifting is so fully engaging of the mind and the chemicals and the emotions that you completely forget about the test you failed. And so that's what makes it feel good. Whatever that bad behavior is, it makes you forget the thing you're feeling bad about. And for a young person, often the thing you're feeling bad about feels like something you have no control over. It could be your parents' divorce, but it could be the fact that you're not studying and you believe that you have no control over your grades and you overlook the fact that you're not studying and possibly even blame that on your parents' divorce. So a young brain is not fully rational and fully aware of all the options. But when something feels good, your brain says, wow, that's the way to go, whatever that stupid thing happens to be.
There is so much in the popular media about building new behaviors or getting rid of bad behaviors. Things like it takes 21 days to build a new habit, right? So if somebody is listening to this and they're thinking, I do engage in bad behaviors, I want to stop that. Loretta just talked about repetition of the good behavior as a reward. Is there science behind how long one needs to do this before they can start to see results?
Yes and no. The bottom line is rather than measuring results, the idea is that you want to build a new neural pathway that will last for the rest of your life, and you're going to engage in this new behavior for the rest of your life. But in a certain amount of time, it's going to get a little easier. And you want to keep rewarding yourself until it gets easier. And that's how you're going to build up the new pathway. Now, how are you going to make it easier? I use the analogy of learning a foreign language, and that has become famous for this concept of gamification. And you are being rewarded for that new repetition. So, this is complicated because, on the one hand, you're trying to give up a reward that's bad for you, but you also have to build the skill of designing rewards that are more healthy than the reward you're trying to get rid of. The famous example of that is in Alcoholics Anonymous. They bless the idea of coffee and donuts because it's better for you than perhaps the reward you're already using. So everyone needs to build the skill of using rewards that they like. And once using rewards that they like that are also relatively healthy. And so then doesn't matter the exact number of days because you're enjoying this. And the simple example of that is if you put a dog into dog training classes, the dog wants to be in those classes because they're getting a dog biscuit. So you have to find that way of giving yourself a dog biscuit, and whether the dog classes last for 3 weeks or 6 weeks, which is the debate in this research, the dog is going to, at some point, learn to do a flip in the air if they stick with the classes, but they stick with it by making the classes fun.
Yeah. So aren't we also creating a dependency on the reward when we are going about it this way?
Good question. That's how a lot of people view it, and that's especially in the parenting literature and the education literature. It's all anti-reward. But my belief is that we're already dependent on the reward structure that we absorbed really by a crapshoot of whatever we were exposed to in our early years and our adolescence. So we're only consciously redesigning the reward structure in the same way that maybe a good manager might design the reward structure for their employees rather than the crapshoot of the reward system created by the most unpleasant employee in your group.
For those who are listening to this, they might be thinking, how do we even go about telling the difference between genuine happiness and a short term chemical spike?
Very good question. And that's exactly why I disagree with so much of the happiness literature. And to answer that, I have to add one more chemical that I didn't talk to before, which is endorphin. So I said there were four, and endorphin is the first one that was discovered. And it's the first one that got attention. And that's why so much of the popular literature mushes them all together and the word endorphins is used collectively for all of them. But in fact, endorphin was a word that meant endogenous morphine, which is the body's natural opioid. And our body and any animal's body is designed to release it when you're in real physical pain. And it evolved for a job, which is if you're attacked by a lion and your skin is ripped open, you can still run to save your life because endorphin masks pain with a euphoric feeling for 15 minutes so you could save your life. So there has arisen this cult of going to the gym to spark endorphin. And I live in an area in Northern California where most people exercise and are not overweight, and they're still not happy, but they have this cult of the only solution is to exercise more and obsess more over your dietary choices. But my belief is that once you've stimulated endorphin by inflicting pain on yourself, you're still not getting dopamine, serotonin, or oxytocin, or you're only getting it by obsessing over diet and exercise rather than the dozens and hundreds and millions of other ways to spark these feelings.
What are some of these ways? Because you're right. And I go to the gym a lot, and there are a lot of friends that I have that come to the gym because they are trying to escape something. They have bad relationships, or they were bullied when they were a kid, or they have a really stressful job, and the only way they can feel good is by going to the gym, putting that hours worth of hard work in. They feel good and they go home. And that feeling good is so valuable, they come back to it over and over again. So if they were listening to this, I know you mentioned millions of other ways to achieve that. What are some things that they could do now?
The first thing is we really want to talk about is to solve the underlying problem. And we don't do that for two reasons. The underlying problem seems insoluble for two reasons. One is because when you were young, you had a problem you could not solve for yourself. And you tried everything and you didn't see any other solutions. And you got upset, frustration, that's cortisol, builds a huge neural pathway. And you go to that big neural pathway today when you have that problem. And also because now we go to that simple distraction as the solution. I'm not going to think about the underlying problem because it seems insoluble. I'm going to just distract myself with the endorphin of pain or the camaraderie of the gym or the dopamine of clicking off how many push-ups I did or the serotonin of feeling like I have a better body than someone else. So the reality is you can't always solve the underlying problem. And that's partly because you're defining the underlying problem the way you did in adolescence or the way you did in childhood. So whether the underlying problem is they're bullying me or someone in my home has a bad attitude and is constantly creating drama, or I feel like my skills are not measuring up. So let's say when I was young, I failed a test. Today at work, every time I don't get the promotion that I want, I flow into that pathway of feeling like I studied the best I could and I still failed and I don't know what to do. There really are things you could do, but you don't notice it because you flow into that pathway. In your home life, this person you're living with creates endless drama, and you think you can't do anything about it because you're flowing into that old pathway when you had drama at home and you really couldn't. So, the first thing is to notice the old pathway that you're flowing into, and then make a list of a dozen things you could do about the problem today. And instead of distracting yourself with an easy answer, do some trial and error experiments about these alternative solutions.
You spent a lot of time working in Africa for the United Nations. How was working in that environment how did that working in that environment influence your worldview on human behavior? It's a different life
Good.
down there.
Yeah, good question. You say I spent a lot of time there. I thank you for that because, in fact, I went with a 2-year contract and quit after 1 year Whereas I meet many Peace Corps volunteers who renewed for the third year. So I always think of it as, and not only did I quit after 1 year, but I quit after 6 months and then got another assignment for 6 months and quit after that. So the fact is, I spent a year in Africa and my graduate work was focused on foreign aid. And let's say that saving the world is a mindset that one inevitably learns in college and maybe in high school. And the more years of education you have, the more you get indoctrinated with this mindset. So I had a PhD saving the world. And yet, when I was in Africa, I saw that there was tremendous corruption and foreign aid workers were looking the other way, and their projects were at a standstill because the funds were stolen by their local counterparts, but they couldn't touch that. The more I delved into psychology, the more I had already gotten past this saving the world mindset. So much of academic psychology is about saving other people, as if you could reach into someone else's brain and fix them, and somehow that the only way to be happy is by fixing someone else, and it's somehow like taboo to feel happy until you fix others. But I have been through that with my mother also. Like I tried to fix her for decades and failed. So I guess I was really the person that was able to take the research and say, how can you fix yourself rather than just focusing on rescuing other people?
You also worked at the Oakland Zoo. How did working there inform your neuroscience teachings?
Oh, thank you so much. So, yeah, I really learned a lot there. Fortunately for me, in 2010, I went through the formal training program of volunteer docents. A docent is like an art museum. There's a docent who tells you about the pictures, and a zoo docent teaches you about the animals. And I went through that at a time when the truth about animals was still openly acknowledged, which is that animals can be quite nasty to each other. And I learned the truth about animal behavior, even though we were not being trained to tell the truth to zoo visitors. But at least I understood it, and I understood that zookeepers are carefully trained to protect animals from being killed by the other animals in the cage that they're in. No one has cages anymore. I just used that word incorrectly. Over time, that whole view of animals has become taboo, and now research is making it seem like animals are altruistic. And now people are thinking, what has gone wrong with the world, because they think that altruism is the state of nature. But there's like a whole century of research that shows that animals are quite nasty to each other. And indeed, my work in the Inner Mammal Institute began with just collecting the books that tell the truth about animals because I saw that it was disappearing. I'm going to stare at the books behind you. I want to see my book there. I'll send it to you. Send me your address.
Yes, I will. I will absolutely. I'm curious though, what is one animal behavior that you think humans could learn from the most?
Very good question. And this is the topic of my new book that I'm working on, like even this morning. Animals have a constant social comparison going on. And they do that because the bigger monkey gets the banana and the bigger monkey gets the mating opportunity. And the reason they get that is because the smaller monkey pulls back in order to avoid getting bitten. Because if they get bitten, they can get permanent injury and starve to death or get eaten by a predator if they're injured. So the animal brain is always saying, I want that banana. But even more than that, I want to not get bitten by a bigger monkey. So it's always looking for an opportunity. Where's a smaller monkey so I can get the banana? So it's constantly doing that social comparison dance. And that sounds quite crude. And so no one wants to admit that they're doing that inside of themselves. And that's why we all have such strong emotions about social comparison, and yet we hate to acknowledge these emotions. So we get upset when other people do this social comparison dance. But when we do it ourselves, we feel like somehow it was forced on us.
So what's the solution though? Because for decades there are philosophers who's also talking about, oh, comparison is the enemy to success and don't compare with the others. Just think about what is your best. How do we navigate this?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It is hard to navigate. And if I may say, I wrote two books about it. So I'll give you a short answer, but I'll also, if I may mention those. So one is called Status Games, Why We Play and How to Stop. And the other is called I Mammal, How to Make Peace with the Animal Urge for Social Power. So the solution is, as you referred to, is your personal best is a healthy way to look at it. But you can only get there by acknowledging that you're doing this social comparison dance. So every time you say to yourself, I don't care about others, I just care about my personal best. But then when you're going to sleep at night, you're stressing over somebody who got a bigger toy. Or when you wake up in the morning, you're stressing about somebody who got more of this or that you didn't get. So it's an important skill to learn to observe when you're doing the social comparison dance instead of just believing that you're somehow morally superior to that thought loop. So you have to keep catching yourself in the old highway and then taking the exit ramp from that old highway into this new pathway that you're doing, which, to go back to the foreign language analogy, people often say, I can speak that language, but I still think in my native language. And that's what we're all thinking in our native mammalian impulses.
Yeah. So you talked about this one example. Are there any other practical lessons that you would like to share about that can take our inner mammal and help us improve our lives by not denying it, but looking it through a different lens, like you said?
Yes, the animal brain learns from rewards, like you see a dog training class where the dog is learning from dog biscuits. And I was honored to participate in a dolphin training class and a goat training class. So the animal brain is obsessed with rewards. And even when you're with a newborn baby, they are like desperate for food every time they open their mouth and they're like, and you think, oh, he loves me, she loves me. But really, they're like, food. That's how the animal brain works. Our animal brain is always looking for rewards. But the practicality of life is you can't be eating a brownie every minute, but your animal brain is looking for a brownie every minute. So, how do you balance those two things? Is to discover a wide variety of rewards that you can get excited about. So I'll give you a few examples of that. But first, I have to say that this is the opposite of the advice you're getting everywhere else. Because if they say, if you're trying to give up alcohol, when you feel like having a drink, you should go and do push ups. But your animal brain says, push ups? Alcohol? I'd rather have the alcohol. What can I offer myself in that moment when I want this treat that's also a treat? For example, I discovered this thing called tart cherry juice. It looks exactly like wine and it's really tart. And when I have a sip of this, I love it. I love it. And it's so good. So for me, it's like a treat at night. I don't have a problem with alcohol, but I grew up with like people having a snack before bedtime, which is really bad for you. And so I can have this tart cherry juice before bedtime. And a relative of mine told me it prevents insomnia. And then other people say it has all these other benefits. So I feel like I'm doing something good, but I also love it. So find things that you love, but are also like it's a treat, but it's also not that bad. Another example, another way to do this, let's just say that you love, somebody loves shopping, somebody loves brownies, whatever you love. Instead of saying, I'm never going to do it again, to find out how you can do it in small doses. Now, I know that in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say that you can't do it in small doses. And for some people, whatever is their thing, they can't do it in small doses. But sometimes it is possible. And so I use the example. So I love ice cream. And my son offered to buy me an ice cream maker. And so what I have now, first I have variety because when you make all different kinds of ice cream, it sparks your dopamine without having as much quantity. And like shopping for ice cream recipes sparks my dopamine without. Then I can make the ice cream with all healthy ingredients. And frankly, I make it's not really as good, but it's hard as a rock. And it's so hard to get out of the container that I only eat a little bit. So this is just examples of ways you could trick yourself to have something you love without overdoing it.
So if we are not designed to be happy all the time, what is the healthy emotional baseline?
Great question. So, the simple answer to that is the word neutral in the sense that a car can either be in forward gear or reverse gear or neutral. So, forward gear is when the mammal brain turns on a happy chemical. The mammal brain doesn't turn on a happy chemical because there's some higher ethical reason that animals sit around being happy about life. The mammal brain turns on a happy chemical when it sees a good opportunity to go for it. And if you're going for it all the time, you're wasting your energy. You need to save your energy for a good opportunity. Until then, being in neutral is your brain's gear for taking in new information. Now, most people don't want to be in neutral. And the reason for that is because they slip into reverse gear in the moment that they're in neutral, as if you were in a car that was on a hill. And the moment you were in neutral, you slide back. And sliding back is to the worst moment of your life because that built the biggest pathway in your brain. So, this is a natural function that we really need to understand. And the bottom line is if you understand that, oh, that's my bad moment. That's my big pathway. That's what I slip back into. And I'm going to catch myself doing that and build an exit ramp to go to neutral. And I want to emphasize that when I say neutral, I don't mean many people have talked about a numbing of emotions. And I don't mean numbing, but not rushing to jump to the conclusion that X is good and Y is bad just because it was good or bad in your youth.
But isn't that the evolutionary response, though? Our ability to come to a conclusion right off the bat, if this is good or not.
Yes, exactly. It is. And that's why we're so lucky that life is long. And even though we're designed to be wired in youth, that we have the capacity to tailor that wiring a bit for the first time in human history. Because for most of human history, there was no birth control. So people started having children very young, and they had to rush to feed their children with whatever survival skills they grew up with, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to just hang around and rewire myself.
Yeah. Loretta, we have now entered a section of the podcast where we have some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions. Whatever comes to your mind, just spit it out. So we're going to start here. What brain chemical do you most naturally lean on yourself?
Thank you for asking. I always tell people that we shouldn't typologize because we all need all of them. But we do, I think, naturally lean on one, even though we need all of them. And dopamine is mine. And when I say that, it's like I really like new things. And for example, I love travel, and yet I hate to go anywhere that I've already been to.
Vince, what is one myth about the brain you wish would disappear forever?
There are so many that I hardly know where to start. But to summarize that most generally is it's society's fault that I feel bad, and it's society's job to make me feel better.
What's one favorite animal behavior that mirrors a human one?
Okay. So animals unite when they have a common enemy. Humans do this all the time. Like when you go for lunch with people, all they talk about is trashing someone who's not in the room. Almost everything you do, that's the topic of conversation, whether it's digitally or in person, whether it's people you love or people you hate. And so I was fascinated to learn that this is what animals do. And when animals don't have a common enemy, they go their own way. They are not in the herd out of love for the herd. They are only in it for protection from their enemy. That's what we need to be aware of the dynamic, even though we should not realistically expect to change it.
Finally, if your brain could talk, what would it say on most days?
What would it say on most days? Let's see. So here's the thing. When you were young, when I was young, if I made my own chocolate chip cookies and I could say, wow, this is the best chocolate chip cookie I've ever had. But now, as the days go by, if I have that same chocolate chip cookie, but it doesn't feel like the best one I've ever had because I've already had it. So even though my life is good, I no longer have that feeling of, wow, this is the best ever. And so I look for that, and then I have to keep reminding myself. And like when you're in college, you look forward to graduation. And then after that, you don't have those clear, seal of approvals that, like, wow, you've done this thing. And I have to keep reminding myself, I guess I have done it, but I'm just not getting the wow.
Yeah, I love it. Loretta, tell us about the Inner Mammal Institute. Tell us how audience can connect with you. Tell us what's going on in your life.
Thank you so much. So, innermammalinstitute.org is my website, and I hope everyone will go there and get information about lots of free resources, videos, podcasts, and all of my books. Plus, I have a free 5-day Happy Chemical Jumpstart where you get one email a day for 5 days explaining 4 happy chemicals and 1 unhappy chemical if you just put in your email address at the bottom of every page. And please keep in touch.
Awesome. Loretta, thank you so much for being on the show. It was just wonderful talking to you. And in a society, in a world where we're almost feeling like all these things are happening to us and we're out of control, you're on a rare mission empowering people and letting them know that we have more control over our lives, our emotions, and the choices that we make. And it's just been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciated your questions. They were so good.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Talk to
and
you
I do
soon.
hope you keep in touch. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.